This presentation is going to cover a span of sexual customs, practices, and taboos using the United States as the base country and comparing that with East Asian countries, specifically Japan, China, and Korea. Specifically, the United States, originating as a Judeo-Christian nation, religion permeates both the conscious and subconscious of sexual morality and behavior throughout the country. Even non-religious citizens face the implicit backlash of violating certain sexual customs, expectations, and even behaviors if the fantasy itself deviates too far off the spectrum. Of course, each individual calculates their own self-inflicted pressure from within, attempting to thread the needle between satisfying his or her sexual fantasies, weighed against the social and moral ramifications of pushing boundaries ever further. Although sexual liberalization has gained momentum, due in large part to the explosion of technological innovation, both in variety and pornographic options, the sexual revolution itself originated in the 1970s, having groups such as LGBTQ push further into the mainstream, diluting the label of same-sex marriage as a sinful taboo. My colleagues will compare and contrast certain topics in exploring what is and what isn't permissible in the 21st century.
Well, with that introduction, I'll start us off with the philosophy of Japan's sort of sexosphere, if you will. So, without getting to the nitty-gritty, I would say, overall, Japan seems to contain more individualistic properties of sexual behavior than one would expect there to be. And what I mean by this is that sexuality in Japan developed separately from that of mainland Asia, as Japan didn't adopt the Confucian view of marriage, in which chastity is highly valued. Monogamy in marriage is actually less important in Japan, and married men often seek pleasure from courtesans or prostitutes. Prostitution in Japan itself has a long history and has become especially popular during the Japanese economic miracle of the 20th century, going into the 21st century, as evening entertainments were tax deductible. Pornography also has a long history in Japan, likely starting in the Edo period as shunga, which were woodblock prints featuring erotic artwork. And I would say that in Japan, the message about sex is not mixed, but compartmentalized. Children are never taught that sex is intrinsically immoral or dirty, only that it needs to be in its proper place, not in conflict with social and occupational obligations. Japan's compartments range from pornography to magazines to love hotels, and even to festivals and shrines that feature 6-foot phalluses parading through the heart of town to meet the bulver trees. Despite these festivals and shrines, however, no genitals can be shown legally in the media, even in porno flicks. Manga comic publishers have a general rule that 40% of an offending organ must be erased. But the Tokyo District Court in 2004 found that this was not enough to prevent some readers from genuinely grasping the condition of the genitalia. Japanese consistently have the least sex of people from 41 countries as well. On some counts, Japan can appear puritanical, but this message can seem contradictory at times. Japan's sex mores ultimately cannot be labeled absolutely. And that is kind of the overview for Japan.
So I'm going to separate Korea into South Korea and North Korea. So in South Korea, so the latest update of the law is that in order to strengthen the protection to the minors, South Korea has revised its age of consent from 13 to 16. So under the new law, adults who have intercourse with the individuals younger than 16 will be prosecuted for the child sexual abuse or rape. So do South Koreans think sex is bad? So sex is still a taboo in Korea, sadly, because the society is really conservative, and they are strong hypocrites. When you start talking to publicity about this topic, about sex topic in general. But why prostitution is strictly forbidden, but like the sex industry in Korea is still developing and like can compare to Japan's sex industry. It's still illegally accessed and developing behind the closed door. But there's a different kind of service they call massage therapists or different kind of sex therapists. That's a way they do prostitution. There's special with Korean who like strictly banned with sex and never have sex before marriage is known as Christian. Christian, they never want to have sex, and even the women, they never talk about sex before marriage. So North Korea is treated as in a more extreme level. Viewing and selling pornography is punished by death in North Korea. Watching porn is strongly restricted. There's a lot of people who watch porn and get executed. For example, Kim Jong-un's ex-girlfriend called Hyun Sung-woo, he was reported executed along with 11 other people after being arrested on August 17 for filming and selling pornographic videos. So, and according to Amnesty International report, it's also found that a man who watched porn with his wife and another woman were executed, and with the entire city summoned to watch their death. But compared to South Korea and Japan, porn smuggled in North Korea is still high value and costing as much as like around 500 for each SD card about porn. That's a little bit a summary about sex as a taboo in North Korea and South Korea. So I'm gonna kick off to Shakil about China.
All right, so basically we went from USA all the way inland to China. So obviously, as you can tell, it gets more and more, I guess, strict as we go on more east. So keep in mind, China, obviously, they're really, obsessed with like this ideology of like nationalism, and basically the sex openness was, and like women's rights was like a low priority. Some of the taboos, one was simple, like pornography. As in China, it's not protected like it is in the United States. So the Chinese law, they prohibit all types of like creating of porn, selling porn, things of that nature. And in the 80s, if you were caught publishing porn, the sentence was death. You'll be punished by death. If we look at a time frame from the 21st century and the 20th century, now it's less severe. So modern day China, if you are caught selling porn or soliciting porn, I think you get I think it's like a criminal detention. An example I found was a 24-year-old Beijing woman. She was sentenced to 6 months. Another one is prostitution. So any like sex soliciting is illegal. Back then, like pre-1980s, the punishment was death. Now, if you get caught prostituting or if you type, your operation will get shut down. So you can tell like, how drastic things have changed. Another taboo that should be like portrayed is like orgies and like sex parties. So the Chinese law, they punish like years at the highest extent. Like if you participated or if you organized like planned sex parties, punishment was death. So like they didn't tolerate any type of prostitution, orgies, porn, anything of that nature. And another one is premarital sex. Premarital sex and homosexuality / same-sex marriage was often looked at as a taboo. In doing research, people in China were more comfortable with transgender than like same-sex marriage, because if you're transgender, it appears like it's like a regular couple, even if they're transgender. I don't know the punishment back then. I know it wasn't death, but I know you will be either fined or jailed for a long period of time. And now, like I think it was 21st century and in the end of the 20th century, homosexuality actually was dropped from the list of crimes in China, I think in 1998, 1997, and it was dropped in 2001 for mental illness. So I want to argue how Connor basically talked about the USA and how, since I'm doing China, it's like two opposite sides. And I think the way the United States approached the 1980s and 1970s sexual revolution was really big in like Western Europe, and it was really big in America. And you can argue as it slowly moved east, China started to get more and more infatuated with this methodology. Obviously, it was more strict than the United States, so things were slowly moving more slowly, I guess you can say. So like often you'll see like nudity and like Broadway shows in America, and like pornography, was increasingly popular and legalized when it became legalized, as it is now in China. So it wasn't off the bat, but it slowly progressed as time moved on. And in China, like the revolution was a little more controlled by the government. But as the 70s approached, prostitution and like things of that nature became less restrictive. All the like sexual revolution in China was like a slower process. Yeah, and that's basically what I got from China.
May I add an additional point? So like I think behind the wall everywhere is the same. So there's nobody refused to have sex on the first night, and it's kind of when it's possible, nobody refused to have sex. So, but in Asians, according to what I know, a lot of guys still have a dream to marry a virgin wife. So it's like really unfair for women in the Asian country not to have sex before marriage, and like what they think is sex is what things are dirty, but for men it's normal to go out for prostitution, looking for another affair and stuff. So that's what I think.
The nitty-gritty is it's a pretty broad spectrum of activities. I would say the United States in the 21st century, and is really with the explosion of the internet technology, massive access to pornography, certain activities have become normalized. It used to be a little bit underground in the shadows in the late 80s, early 90s to have virtual sex. The personal computer wasn't fully developed yet. The internet was still. Virtual sex is sexting, trading pictures. It's all pretty normalized these days. Virtual sex has gone mainstream. Sex toys, again, a little bit on the side of taboo. Most of us are pretty familiar with those sex shops. But again, mainstream businesses, nothing to be too ashamed of. There's a lot of things. The culture of the United States specifically has embraced consensual impact play. You could think 50 Shades of Grey, if you will. It's essentially consensual spanking and biting and love taps. It's sort of a kink. And it's also interrelated with BDSM. Basically, that's the acronym for bondage, discipline, dominance, and submission. And we're in a very interesting crux in the United States where we have the hashtag #MeToo movement becoming more mainstream and consent being ever more important versus a culture that has embraced books and movies such as 50 Shades of Grey, where submission and domination are a huge theme throughout those mediums. And so BDSM, consensual impact play. You also have reverse typical gender standard roles. In other words, the female becomes the dominant figure in the group, and the male will become the submissive. You have all sorts of kinds of terms for that. Typically, it's called pegging. It's a huge kink. That one would be very much considered a taboo. That one, especially for men. Men don't want to admit publicly in the United States. They want to be masculine. They don't want to show a sense of being submissive or weak. They don't want to be labeled homosexual. Again, you have conflicting back and forth themes where, yes, the United States of America is trending towards a more liberal acceptance of LGBTQ, but there are those undercurrent forces that are pushing back, particularly among men. Men don't want to be seen as soft or unmasculine, if you will. And so there's always that tension there. Group play is accepted, but it's very secretive. It's certainly still within the shadows. You'll have other terms called voyeurism and exhibitionism. That's typically a situation where if you're a couple, you like the idea of being watched by other people or watching other people live action. That, again, still in the category of taboo, still not generally accepted as a norm, but it's increasingly becoming more mainstream. Certain other biological kinks, if you will, you have menstrual sex, you have anal sex, these things are not taboo, but they are relegated to the individual's personal preference. So there's just a bunch of different little kinks and taboos that have, even though they are generally as a whole moving towards normalized, there are still inverse forces acting in the opposite direction. So it's complicated, but certainly the United States, since at least the 1970s, is trending towards a more liberal, open society where there's not too much judgment on any one particular preference of sexual activity. But there is, like I said, there is a moral, religious aspect to it that's pushing up against that.
I'd like to start with a phrase that kind of explains the relationship between shyness and nudity in Japanese culture. I believe it's, goddamn, I'm going to mispronounce this. No, suikiai, which means naked fellowship, which means everyone is all the same when they're naked. Going to bathe is a place where you literally can't hide anything. However, not all sexual experiences involve conventional sex. Fuzoku culture involves paid fantasies that take place in image clubs and playrooms where entertainers would dress as nurses, policewomen, and secretaries to mimic meetings in various settings. Japan also happens to boast some of the most technologically sophisticated sex dolls in the world, sometimes featuring lifelike silicone materials that mimic human skin. In fact, experimental sexual endeavors aren't just limited to men either. In the Shibuya district of Tokyo, for example, the Vibe Bar Wild One allows women to sample vibrators while drinking. However, that isn't to say that women bear the brunt of most sexual cravings, resulting in the presence of misogyny throughout the sexual culture. Sexual harassment and assault occurs publicly and privately in the spaces of trains, schools, clubs, and elsewhere. The Super Free Club of the 90s is an example of what are essentially rape clubs that organize date rapes for women seeking alcohol. However, sexual education and protections against assault have been recognized as necessities for the victims as of lately, with efforts to increase sexual literacy and to implement protections such as GPS trackers for offenders. And there was also just a neat little tidbit that I found. There was one where in Japan there are actually perfumes that aim to capture the scent of female students' periods for those interested in forbidden scents. Other scents include girl armpit and the smell of a boy's anus, for example. So I think on that note, I will conclude that overall, the realm of sexual possibilities in Japan is vast, and that comes with its own risks and rewards. And that was a little bit shorter, but hopefully Charlotte can make up for that.
It's compared to like the US and Japan, I don't think South Korea and North Korea are quite not really open when talking about sex. So everything's happened behind the closed door, and they only have the definition, like a basic definition of intercourse. Intercourse is sex. So there's no type about virtual sex or anal sex. Like they don't talk about it. That's just because it seemed like a taboo, so people restricted in it. And for example, for even more for LGBT sex, in North Korea, homosexual is not seen as a word. It's same-sex relation is legal, but authorities doesn't accept it. And even in South Korea, even this the developed country with a lot of international connection and partnership, but LGBTQ it's seen they don't really accept LGBTQ, and seen as mental illness and disability. So there's no LGBT sex compared to open-minded country like Korea. But because they also the most important things in South Korea is that about women virginity. You need to keep virginity when getting married. So sex not really, as I said at conclusion, sex not really open to talk in South Korea. So there's not many type when talking about sex in South and North Korea. How about in China, Shakil?
Yeah, so basically, honestly, there was a lot of similarities between China and North Korea and well, South Korea as well. Um, in terms of like premarital sex, um, it was often like frowned upon, and it was not really practiced until like recent years, like 21st century. Um, but something that I found that was interesting about like China was like sex toys. They it became like a really popular thing like in the early 2000s. I know like the China like retailers, they had like online retailers that had like adult sexual products, and I think like in the revenue, it passed like 900 million like US dollars. So it was like a big thing, you know, as this notion of sex and the taboos from starting maybe like 1950s onward. As it became less restrictive, more and more people started to become like alert and like willing to express their sexuality, whether they were into premarital sex, whether they're homosexual, whether if they like, you know, foreplay, those type of things. And I think every year in China, I think it was in Beijing, they have like China like adult care expos. So they became like increasingly popular throughout the years. And then also like virtual sex, that became popular as well. It was looked at as some taboo, but virtual sex became popular. I think in the early 2000s was something more people got familiar with, and as time progressed, virtual sex became like this notion of became more and more, I guess, like normalized in China. Keep in mind that basically everything's restrictive. So the fact that it was so restrictive, and some of the punishments could be death or could be jailed. A lot of these things that you see now that Connor mentioned, whether it be sex toys, whether it be, you know, these different taboos that seem to be, you know, barbaric back then, you know, and it became popular. And not only popular, more and more people start to express themselves freely, the way the USA did, the way, you know, other parts of the world did, the way Europe did, the way, you know, other parts, as they became, you know, brought out to light. And I think, I don't know who came up with the term like free the nipple, but I think that came from the US. But other countries, like to me, doing China, there were a bunch of instances where the terminology free nipple became very popular then, and they kind of kind of followed by example, so to speak. But yeah, I think just the biggest notions on what has changed dramatically would be like virtual sex and sex toys. And that's like the biggest takeaways I got from China. And that's pretty much the bulk of what I got.
With all of those observations taken, we can start our game, which is, I guess, kind of a trivia game. But I'll let Connor host it.
Yeah, this incorporates all we've learned throughout this entire project. And I guess everyone in the class, if they want to put it down in the chat, feel free to answer as well. But yeah, there's about 12 questions. We will alternate. I'll ask the first question. My three colleagues will answer, and then we'll switch. We'll rotate. So Drake, you'll ask the second question. First question coming up. Which country, in your guys' opinion, is more addicted to pornography? The United States, China, North Korea, Japan, or South Korea? All right. I love it. Charlotte, why'd you say Japan?
You know, it's like it obviously Japan has like the world largest sex business. So as I said, I choose Japan for like addicted to pornography. And once I experienced myself when I traveled to Japan, staying in hotel,
Uh-huh.
there's a whole booklet of pornography with like a wide selection. It's like no secret, they leave it public on the table. It's like at that moment I really shy and embarrassed. So I have to hide in some closet so stay away from my parents. That's so awkward. But yeah, it's just normal.
Surprised you guys didn't answer North Korea. That would have been my answer.
I mean, Japan itself, from what I read, they also, I didn't mention this in my research, my observations in the previous rounds, but they have, I'm sorry, porn star baseball cards. And you'll also have opportunities to pay to be near a porn star sometimes. Like sometimes there's opportunities to be paid for a slap on the wrist from a porn star even. Like, the porn stars in Japan, they're not exactly royalty, but they are certainly celebrities in their own right on the basis of them being, very prominent figures.
I feel like porn star is like also known as like idol, like K-pop idol in Japan. So it's like they're really popular. Like they in everywhere in every kind of social media.
Yeah. One thing though that's interesting is that there's no male porn stars, like stars in Japanese porn. The existence of like famous like actors within them isn't necessarily a thing, but if you've watched The Naked Director on Netflix, you'll know that like there are also like famous like porn directors who like helped to sort of change the culture, specifically regarding like real sex within like films.
You're on yeah, Drake, you got question 2, my man.
Yeah, I mean, if that's everyone's thoughts on the first question, I will ask, which country do you think is most likely to have virtual sex involving someone dressing up as a Pokemon? All right. Okay. Well, there you have it. A nice consensus. Yeah, that's the kind of evolution that I was not expecting for Matt. Okay, well, I think that one's pretty clear cut. I think we can move on to Charlotte's question right now.
Sure. If Godzilla and Onyx were in a relationship, who would be dominant and who would be the submissive? Ooh. Godzilla. Oh.
Yeah, same here, Drake. 100%.
So, someone want to explain why?
He's just overcompensating too much, He's overcompensating way too much. We all know.
I think because Godzilla's whole thing is that he cares about the Earth. He doesn't want any damage to the environment. And what better way to repay the environment than to be dominated by a bunch of rock?
Shaquille, you're up, my man. Question 4.
Yes or no? Have you ever been aroused by Shang-Chi paintings or pictures?
Of course. That's like too obvious.
I mean,
It's not having it.
I don't know. It's like when when sex is included in like a television show, I don't view it with the same, intentions,
It's too PG.
I don't know. Maybe I'm just not using it for its intended purpose, I guess. I'm just doing it wrong. Okay.
There's no right or wrong, Drake.
Yeah, it's just like personal opinion though. But
all right.
All right, I'm up. Question 5. Question 5. In which country are LGBTQ couples more likely to demonstrate PDA? It's like USA.
That's right.
Yep.
I mean,
already in USA.
100%.
Yeah. I mean, it's out there. I'm not sure if they would wave the same flag in these other countries as often. But, I mean, I don't know. Like public displays of affection too are like a very American thing, even for non-LGBT plus like couples and like sort of relationships.
Yeah, USA have really like open-minded talking about LGBTQ. Like I said before, like in North Korea, homosexual is not a thing. They don't support it, and even in South Korea, they judge. People stay away from LGBT, and a lot of people scared. Even some parents, they have a strict like talk to their kid. But like she said, some interviews said that his mom even say, "Oh, I don't need a son like you," or homosexuality is a country ruined disease. So that's kind of horrible when talking about LGBTQ like in North Korea and South Korea. So
Yeah, same China as well. I feel like North Korea and South Korea, they have a lot of the same like ideas as China. Basically is the exact same thing. So I don't know, like I can't really see like one of these flags being waved around, but I don't know. It's a lot more strict than like United States for sure. You know, you see these flags anywhere from college campuses all the way to like politics. So it's definitely became like a big notion here in the States.
Japan itself doesn't have any laws against homosexual activity, as far as I'm aware, from what I've read. It actually has some protections for gay individuals in the legal system, although there are no civil rights laws that extend protection from discrimination, like against homosexuality, like based on social, like any sexual orientation, even outside of homosexuality, that's like not conventional. Yeah.
You got question 6.
Which yaoi would you prefer to read? Bruce Lee and Major Makoto Kusanagi, or Ash Ketchum and Brock? Wow, you guys are all.
oh, why so special, Jake?
Is Ash even of legal age, guys?
Well, a teenager that they can relate and like they look like a cute couple.
Okay, fair. They might make a cuter couple.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I feel like I don't know, like Bruce and the Major, they would get pretty wild, because they do all these action stunts,
muscular guys.
If their movies are action packed, I'd assume their romance would be action packed.
Yeah, actually, I want to change mine to Bruce Lee.
Let's go, Shaquille.
Like my essay was actually about Jackie Chan, Jet Li, and Bruce Lee. And like the stuff I found with Bruce Lee, like he had a documentary on ESPN called Be Water, and oh man, it was insane. So I'm switching it. I gotta.
Sure. I mean, like, who wouldn't want to just be water in Bruce Lee's hands?
It's a good point.
Good.
You're up, Charlotte.
Okay, next question.
A little too much for this class. All right.
Is Nels a member of LGBTQ community? Oh. Meow. Yeah. Hell yeah. I read it on Reddit once. They said, "Oh, they so aggressive when talking about if males is a LGBT community." It says, "Oh, there's literally no reason that Pokemon should be gay. It's just a game, people. If it would be any different if there's a gay lesbian couple in a game or anime, but having gay Pokemon is literally pointless." So like, too aggressive people. It's just a joke.
Oh, I mean, now that the cat's out of the bag, I mean,
we all knew.
If that's that.
Okay, Shakir, your question.
Have you ever Hello Kitty and role played during sex?
Drake, don't lie.
Look, Hello Kitty would not be my first choice.
Me too.
Wouldn't be my last, but people should not be ashamed, to don the cat. Different strokes.
I could never imagine a sexy Hello Kitty. Like a lot of sexy cat during Halloween, but like not sexy Hello Kitty like this.
I think at that point it's just Hello Kitty. All right.
That was pretty good.
I don't have the skills to transition from that.
That was pretty good. I liked it. All right. This one's another lighthearted question. Is there sex in heaven? Should be, yes. Oh, that's great.
No. That's the move. Yeah, honestly, I don't know. Out of all of these countries, I think heaven. You'd expect heaven to have the most options.
Yeah, like we have angels, we have Jesus, a lot.
I mean, if you find the right country for you, I mean, you're already in heaven. Right day, I guess.
All right, Drake, you got question 10, my man.
What is the proper age to formally teach your pet dog or puppy about sex?
2, 3.
2 to 3. Yeah.
2/3.
2, 3.
No, 2, 3. Like,
Oh, okay. So what, Charlotte, would you tell your dog? Is that the first person you would confide in?
Who knows? That could be my friend who's like I share how do I have sex. I think.
Well, a dog will never judge you for whatever your preference is, I think.
True.
I think they'd be a good confidant. They'll keep your secrets.
Okay. Is it true or false? The Japanese symbol of sex intimacy and reproduction is magicab.
Hell yeah, it's true.
Why, Drake?
I would love, because a Magikarp is basically like encapsulates the best parts of Pokemon.
It's easily the sexiest Pokemon.
I mean, well, actually, when you think about it, because like Magikarp starts out as a very limp fish that doesn't move around a lot, but he becomes a kind of phallic image when he evolves into Gyarados, and like he's like this like elongated. I think that could be like a kind of like euphemism in its own way. So I think while he's not the biggest sex symbol, I think he could function as one really well.
We should look back at the photos of a guy with red underwear with a Magikarp costume, though.
He was an aphrodisiac.
Why?
How could I miss it? Well, here's the next question, Shaquille.
Last question.
Last one.
true or false? Oral sex is simply talk about sex.
What do you mean that's what Wikipedia says?
I looked it up.
What?
Yeah,
Wait,
that's just
whoa.
Look it up.
Look, never mind. I don't want to know what you looked up. But
That's the definition. That's the official definition of
I
oral
feel
sex.
like if you ask to have oral sex, I don't think you'll get a conversation.
You never know.
yeah. Some people don't even understand
Yeah,
what
you
the
don't-
oral sex mean.
Oh no,
Oral
I've
is
been having
talk.
oral sex this entire time.
Asian parents still think that you can get pregnant when you're holding hands. So that's nothing insane when talking about oral sex. Is simply talking about sex. So
All right. Okay. Well, that's the last question. I guess, class, if you've been talking amongst yourselves like during this whole time, settle down.